Facial recognition technology has been facing increasing backlash in the U.S., but some tech giants are reportedly refocusing their marketing efforts in the Persian Gulf. BuzzFeed reports companies like IBM, Hikvision, and Huawei are selling their surveillance systems to countries like the United Arab Emirates. San Francisco banned the use of facial recognition technology by police and other public agencies earlier this month. And Amazon faced pressure from its shareholders and workers last week to stop selling its recognition software to government agencies. Megha Rajagopalan joins us now from Venice, Italy. She is a reporter for BuzzFeed News. Megha, thank you so much for being with us. Why are these companies turning to countries in the Persian Gulf, especially as they face mounting pressure from lawmakers in the U.S., Canada, and Europe to regulate their software?
Well, surveillance technology has very few curbs on it anywhere, sort of globally, including in democratic countries in the EU or the United States, for instance. But the Persian Gulf is a place where governments have shown an interest in surveilling the populace and in keeping tabs on people like dissidents and journalists. And it's also a place where there are sort of very few checks on the government's ability to do that. So a lot of these companies see governments in the Persian Gulf as sort of a lucrative market and a place where demand exists for their technology.
But does giving access to high-tech surveillance to countries in the Gulf pose a threat to other nations, perhaps?
Well, certainly we've seen countries in the Gulf use their surveillance powers not only on their own population, but on exiles, including people who have obtained citizenship in other countries. Saudi Arabia, for instance, spends a lot of resources spying on exiles, including feminists who have fled the country. The UAE, which I've written about, has spent a lot of resources trying to crack cell phones and send spyware to exiles who live in places like the U.S. and Western Europe.
Right. And BuzzFeed, of course, spoke to some of those former detainees, prisoners, and human rights advocates focused on the UAE. And they said facial recognition software is, quote, good technology until it isn't. So in what ways are they seeing facial recognition being misused?
So face recognition is still a relatively new technology, and there's not a lot of transparency about how the technology is actually being used, neither in the Gulf nor really in the U.S. or Europe, but particularly in the Gulf, because activists are used to living under the strain of this kind of constant surveillance and the sort of fear that the government will catch on to their criticism and sort of other things that they're trying to do in public. Face recognition technology presents kind of another realm in which they have to sort of self-censor and be more careful about their actions. If they're already being careful in the digital sphere where they talk to people on email or in private messages, they now have to be even more careful, even in the real world in public, where they go in real life, whether they organize demonstrations, who they talk to, all of that stuff can be under further surveillance in a way and with a greater intensity that it wasn't before.
How sensitive and advanced is this technology at this point? Because, I mean, it seems to me there's a huge opportunity for mistaken identities here, not only because, as everyone knows, one day you look a certain way, the next day you're tired, you might look different, you have a cousin who looks just like you. I mean, there's so many ways that people can look like other people and get confused.
That's absolutely right. One of the key problems with this technology is that, by and large, there have been no sort of independent audits of how reliable or how accurate this technology is at actually finding people that the police are looking for. And in the UAE in particular, the police have already bragged about using face recognition technology to find and arrest hundreds of suspects. But we don't know who those suspects are or on what grounds they were actually arrested, whether probable cause really existed. And this problem exists in lots of different countries. Independent studies in the United States have found that face recognition technology often has racial bias baked in, has gender bias baked in, yet police forces around the world are now using this kind of biometric surveillance to glom up tons and tons of images of people, tons and tons of data about people, by and large without their consent and without really any oversight into how effective the technology really is at targeting people.
Yeah, I mean, I know I look a lot different with my TV makeup on than with it off, so I wonder how I would get identified.
Me too.
But it does seem like this technology does have supporters. What are some of the real advantages to using facial recognition?
So, face recognition, it's the same category as technology that detects objects in lots of different ways in video feeds. So, people who support this technology or, the companies certainly that make it would point to advantages like for instance, if you were looking at a group of people on a construction site, for instance, you could tell if somebody's wearing a hard hat like they're supposed to be wearing. You can use the same kind of technology for medical diagnosis. Looking at a group, you can see if somebody's healed over because they fainted from heat or something like that. But the thing is, all of this stuff is, if even the safety applications, it can be really beneficial for security and for societal good. But I think the problem that privacy activists have is that there's really no regulation for government overstep when it comes to this technology. So even if it has, the capacity for social good, it's sort of marred by the fact that it's very easy for law enforcement and other security authorities to abuse it to target people that they just don't like.
Absolutely. Megha Rajagopalan, we thank you so much. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.